Hey, thanks for stopping by. Today we're going to talk about creating a materials library in LightBurn. I don't know about you, but I was writing down all my speeds and power settings for all the different materials I was trying to use with my laser, and on occasion I'd lose one of these and have to start from scratch. Once I show you how to do this in LightBurn today, you'll be able to go ahead and get rid of all of this and have a great library for all the different materials that you use in your laser. It's easy to do. There's a couple of tricks that you need to learn, but once you start using the material library in LightBurn, you'll never go back. So I'm going to take you step by step. I'm going to show you how to create one from scratch in case you don't have a materials library that was provided by your manufacturer. And that way you can feed in your own speeds and power settings. And you'll be amazed on how fast and efficient this can be once you get it set up. It won't take but just a few minutes to generate, and you're off to the races from there. So let's go to LightBurn and see how it's done. Today we're going to learn about materials libraries in LightBurn. This is a very handy tool in LightBurn once you get used to using it. And the beautiful thing about this is if you have all of your speeds and power settings written down on a piece of paper or a logbook, you can go ahead and feed that information into this materials library, and you won't have to keep track of your notebook. It's fast, it's efficient, and I'm going to show you how to do it from scratch today. So the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that your library tab is turned on. If you look at your tabs over here, you may not see a tab that's named library. If so, what you need to do is you need to come up to Window, come down to Library, make sure it's selected, and it's going to show up either in the top or bottom section of your panes. So before I get started in showing you how to create one of these libraries from scratch, I wanted to go over the hierarchy on how these are built. It's important for you to understand what you're going to need in the way of information before you get to generate one of these. And once you understand it, you can see how easy and efficient this is going to be if you start to use it. So the first thing that I will show you here, I've got one here that's populated already. This one's from Thunder Laser. They provide a pretty extensive cut library that you can use with your machines. If your manufacturer didn't provide you a cut library, again, I'm going to show you how to do it from scratch, and you'll get the same result. So the first thing to keep in mind is whatever you name your library file, it's going to show up here. And so be fairly descriptive with your naming convention on your file, because that way you can look up here at a glance and know which library you're using. The good thing about the way they've got it set up is this file that we're going to generate does not reside in LightBurn. It doesn't reside in the software itself. This is a standalone file that you're going to choose the destination on where you want to save it and what you're going to name it. And so you can have as many of these libraries as you would like. It's just a personal preference on whether you want to separate a wood library from an acrylic library. Completely up to you. So whatever you name your file, that's what's going to show here. And the way the hierarchy works is you list your material, and underneath that material you will list a thickness. And for engraving, it will list no thickness because you're not really cutting, you're engraving. And then underneath that would be the action or cut. And so you can see that for plywood, for engraving, I've got two different engraving settings, one for just straight engraving and one for photo. And then I have for different sizes of plywood what my cutting settings will be underneath. So one of the things that you'll notice today is you have to always select the very bottom layer. You have to be selecting this layer here before you get any information to where you can start to assign this to different layers. So if I select just plywood, you notice that all of this is grayed out. Even if I select thickness, most of this is grayed out. I can create a new entry from an existing layer, but I can't assign any information to a new layer. I have to select the very lowest layer, or this section right down in here, before it opens up and gives me the ability to either assign this information to a layer, or to edit the existing cut, or to edit the description. And so we'll get into more of this when we're actually building a library, but I just wanted to give you a sense of kind of how this is all determined. The other thing that I will tell you, and this is where a lot of people get into trouble, and I've talked to a lot of people that get confused by this, so I'm going to spend just a few minutes on it. This new button right down here is not to generate a new entry in your library. That's actually to generate a brand new library. So if I click this where it says new, everything goes away. And that's what freaks everybody out, is when they were thinking they were going to add to their existing library, they click new, and all of a sudden they don't have anything, and they get all freaked out because they think they've lost all of their information. They didn't lose their information, they just unloaded the library that was there. I can always go back and reload the existing library that we had up on the screen before. So if, one thing I would love to see LightBurn do is change the naming convention on this button here, because it confuses people. People are thinking that they're adding a new entry into an existing library, and you're generating a new library when you say new. So just keep that in mind. So next, we'll go ahead and start to populate a brand new library. So we're going to go ahead and get started on creating a brand new material library from scratch. You should have your library tab turned on, which is up here in the Windows section right here. This should be selected. You should see your library tab. If you want to push new, you can. You should have no file name up here. Everything is blank. You'll notice that you don't have hardly any items over here that you can select. And one of the first things that you're going to realize is you can't start to generate your library without just some basic vectors to work on. So what I did is I just put in some letters and some dog bones, just so there would be some layers over here to get started on. So you can't just feed this information in without at least having something. It could be as simple as just a rectangle. It really doesn't matter what it is. You just have to have something on here for it to go ahead and chew on. So the way I thought we'd do this to get started is, let's say that we have some Baltic birch plywood. We've got 3 different engraved settings. We've got a light engraved setting. We've got a medium engraved setting, and we've got a dark engraved setting. And then over here, we've got some different cut settings for different sizes of Baltic birch plywood. And maybe we've got these written down on a sheet of paper, and we want to get those into the library to get our library started. This is all we're going to need. It's basically just a vector and the information from your sheet, and we can go ahead and feed that into this over here. So the first thing that we're going to do is, to get started, if I put in a vector, it doesn't really matter what it is, and I assign it a color. So in this particular case, I put in the letter R, and I assigned it to a blue layer. And then I came over here and I opened the layer, and I'm going to put in 350 at 17%. And my minimum for my machine is about 14%, and I'm going to indicate that it's a fill, no air assist. anytime you're starting to build your library, when you're doing this and you're going to add what you want in your library, you want to make sure that all of this is correct because it will remember all of these settings. So your speed, your minimum and maximum powers, the mode level that you are selecting, whether you want air assist on or off, what your lines per inch need to be, all of this is going to be remembered. So you want to just verify that that's what you want. Okay. And so at this point, we're going to say, okay, I've got this set at 350 at 17%, and it's my blue layer. Now, one thing about when you're creating your your material library, it doesn't assign layers. The only thing it's assigning is just your settings, just your mode and your power and your speed settings. It's not, in other words, when we save this information from a blue layer into the materials library, it's not going to change the color to blue when you assign it on another project down the road. It's only going to assign just the mode, the speed, power, and the output, and anything else that's in this information here. Okay, so it's not going to assign layer color. Once we've done that, and we've got a layer up here that's got a specified amount, and this is just for this very first entry. We can say, if we make sure that this is highlighted, we can say create new from layer. And if I click that, it's going to ask me what the material name is, and we're going to say plywood. And we're going to indicate that there is no thickness, meaning that it's an engraving, and so it won't show inches of depth. And we're going to put in an engrave. And you can have many things. You could name it engrave and then put photo or engrave slate or whatever you wanted. The description is completely open. And if we say OK, now you can see we have our very first entry to our plywood. Okay, if I close it up, now you're just going to see the plywood. If I open it up, you're going to see no thickness, and it's the engrave. There's two different ways we can input these additional two entries into our plywood engrave level. We can come in here and we could either come in here and open this up and feed this information. So the 350 stays the same. We're going to change this to 20 and say OK. And then at this particular point, we're going to say create, make sure that you're selected at the very highest level and say create new from layer, plywood, no thickness. And this is going to be engrave medium. And we've got that done. Or you could come in here and now click on this and say duplicate and come back and say dark and say OK and edit the cut. Come in here and open it up and change this from 20 to 35. Okay. And so now we've got our three different entries for our plywood for engrave. If we needed, I made a mistake here. I wanted to put engrave light. So if I just click there and I say edit description, I can go back and I can modify this description. And now we've got dark, light, and medium. If I want to verify each one of these, I just click on the selection, come up here and say edit cut. It opens that particular layer to make sure I've got everything that I needed. And I'm just double clicking these to open these layer informations. Great. So now at this point, we have 3 different levels of engraving under plywood. Now let's talk a little bit about how we can go ahead and add the cut layers for our library under plywood. A couple of different ways we can do that. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and enter our cut parameters to add to our plywood material library. And at this point, you notice that I've got a red layer, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to open that red layer and just make sure I've got this first entry going. And so I want it to be 20 millimeters per second at 60% power. And because it's a cut layer, I'm going to say 60% power on both the min and max. I'm going to make sure that I have my air assist on, that it's at line 1, number of passes, any kerf offset that you might require, and I'm going to say OK. So at this point, I know that this layer is correct for my 1/8 inch Baltic birch plywood. And I'm going to go ahead and say I've selected the highest level, so I want to put this information underneath the plywood, and I'm going to say create from layer. And it's going to go in the plywood. Now I'm going to select the thickness, so it's off, and that opens up this dialog box, so I have the ability to put in my thickness. And here I will say cut. Again, you can have many descriptions for your scenarios. You might have certain types of wood that require a unique setting. This is a perfect scenario for that. You can be as descriptive as you need to here. So I'm going to say OK. And you notice that now we have an engrave line and a thickness line under plywood. Okay, I can do one of two things. I can select this, and I can say duplicate, and I will change this to 1/4 inch, and I will say cut, and then I'll come in here and edit the cut and change that to 15 millimeters per second and at 60% power. Everything else is going to be the same. And now I've just generated my cut specifics for my 1/4 inch. If I wanted to do 1/2 inch, I could say duplicate and change this to 1/2 inch and say OK. Come into this, edit cut, and change the parameters for this to 6 millimeters per second and 75% power. OK. And now you see we've got 3 different thicknesses and cut settings for our plywood. Okay, now that we've got our material library generated for our plywood, we're going to go ahead and save this material library. One thing I would caution you on is don't get too many entries in here before you generate a file and save it. Otherwise, you have a chance of losing it all. So just get a little bit in that file, go ahead and save it, and then you can save these entries along the way. I will tell you that anytime you modify your library, you want to make sure that you hit the save button, because there's a chance if you don't do that and you have a hiccup, you'll lose what you've input. So we've got our plywood library, we've got our engrave, all of our engrave layers taken care of, all of our different thicknesses taken care of. This little plywood library is looking pretty good. So I want to go ahead and save it. And so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to hit the save button. And I'm just going to go to my desktop for right now. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to say test for YouTube. And you notice that it is a LightBurn library, meaning that you're not going to read this with any other software. So just keep that in mind. Make sure that this is saved in a safe spot along with your art library, because if you lose this, you're starting from scratch. So please make sure that this file isn't a place where you've got duplicate copies, it gets backed up, those kind of things. So I'm going to say save. And you notice, at least right now, we don't have a file library, or we don't have a name up here yet. And that's because we haven't loaded it for the first time. So what we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to just go ahead and come in here and load it. And now you see that it shows up. All of your entries are there. Now let's go ahead and show you how fast and efficient this is. Oops, excuse me. Okay, let's show you how efficient this material library can be. So let's say that I came in, I generated a rectangle. That's going to be my cut line. I'm going to cut this out of, let's say, 1/4 inch Baltic birch plywood. I'm going to engrave YouTube in the middle of this little piece of wood, and you've laid that out. The beautiful thing about this is now it doesn't matter what layer you select. I could actually come in here and select this and change it to this layer right here, come over to plywood, go down to 1/4 inch, select cut, and come over here and say assign to layer. And you notice now it's what we chose based on the layer color we went. If for some reason we didn't want to use the blue layer as our engrave, we come over here and let's say that we wanted maybe a pink layer. We could come up here and come up here to engrave, and let's say that we wanted a very dark engraving. Select that, make sure that we've got the layer that we want for the engraving. Come down here and say assign to layer, and you see now we've got that. Or let's say that nope, dark's too much, we want to go light. We select light, and you can see now, bang bang, I'm done. So you don't have to worry about thumbing through your notes in a separate notebook. This is really efficient. Again, you can have it set up for whatever types of scenarios you want. And so next we're going to go ahead and jump into just modifying an existing one a little bit. And try this out. You'll be amazed on how quick you'll be able to assign your cut parameters and get work done. Okay, real quick, if you have an existing library and you want to modify settings or descriptions in that library, or even add to the library that you already have, it's just like what we talked about before. If for some reason you needed to come in here and adjust a particular setting in a certain thickness of cut file, you just select your lowest level. You can edit the description, meaning you could be more descriptive here. If you needed to edit the cut, you can open up the cut and go ahead and modify it there. Or if you needed to add an additional cut, you can go ahead and duplicate, and it will stay under this major heading as long as you don't change the material name. And again, so you can modify and add to any existing one that you want. Just remember that when you're done, you always want to go ahead and hit the save button. You can also delete things as well. If for some reason you're finding that you don't use anything ever, or it's getting in your way, you want to put it on a different library, you can always just go ahead and select one of these and open it up all the way to the lowest level and hit delete, and that will go away, and then hit save. As you can see, this the materials library can be really helpful. And if you're diligent about when you're dialing in new settings for new materials, if you just highlight what you've done and then say create from layer and create your new naming convention, pretty soon you'll have a pretty extensive materials library to refer to.
Well, as you can see, generating a material library in LightBurn is easy and it will save you a ton of time. I hope this information was helpful, and as always, if you'd please like and subscribe, I'd certainly appreciate it. Until next time, have a great day.